Members will form a quorum. Since the last meeting, we haven't issued any information paper. Items for discussion at the next meeting. The next meeting will be held on the 1st of June. It's a Friday, same time. Next time, the government proposed 3 items. First, the setting up of a student activity support fund. Second, adjustments to the upper limit of fee waiver of kindergarten and childcare center fees. As the third one is the latest development in the promotion of reading. Comments, members? I don't oppose to any one of the 3, but as I've proposed many times, I would like to see that within this year we can once again discuss the progress of the review of the liberal studies subject. But so far, there's no news. Have you been able to talk to the administration or the Education Bureau over this point? We received a letter, a reply letter from the Secretary for Education. It said that in November last year, a review task force was set up on the subject of liberal studies. And the Bureau would like to wait until there's a clear consensus on the way forward for the liberal studies, then they will come back to brief us. So when will be the time for consensus to emerge? Perhaps we can put this question to the officials attending today's meeting in a moment. We have heard from the news that they have set up this review group. And it was also mentioned in the news that apart from teachers and students, they also consulted other stakeholders, including teachers and future and prospective employers. But I remember that there was a reference in one of the papers that they will only be consulting teachers and students. All right? Are you on the same subject? Well, we are going to have the officials joining us soon. Perhaps you can put the questions to them direct. One more thing. Special education and it's on item 17 for a long time. Special education and integrated education. We've been waiting for so long. Can we get a more definitive answer from the Bureau? Do we have a clear scope for the this proposed discussion, so that they can prepare a paper for it? Well, I'm talking about the private members' bill on special education and integrated education. Can you put the question to them on my behalf? So you want to know specifically what we would like to discuss? Yes. We need to be clear about this, because we need the Bureau to prepare some information. If the scope is too wide, then they don't know what to do. Mr. Yip Kin Yuen, I said this last time, that the appointments and renewal of appointments of university teachers, and I actually wrote a letter to the panel proposing some discussion on the topic and a public hearing. We have had incidents with some of the tertiary institutions concerned already. So we would ask the Education Bureau to respond to the letter sent by Mr. Yip, or that they can prepare a paper for our discussion. We submitted the letter last week or this week. Well, it was a long time ago. All right, we'll take follow-up action. It's about some lecturer posts in some of the universities. All right, we move on, and the first item, please invite the officials to join us now. First item on item 3, arrangement for student guidance teacher, student guidance personnel under the policy of one school social worker for each school in primary school. There was some discussion. We started the discussion last time, but there was insufficient time. That's why we need to revisit this topic today. Several members have indicated their wish to speak. Who else would like to speak on this one social worker for each school policy? Hands up, please. Here's the list carried forward from the last meeting. We have Michael Tin, Claudia Mo, Liang Chi-Chang, Zhang Guoguan, Ted Hui, Fernanda Zhang, Ao Lok Hin, Dennis Kwok, Priscilla Leung, Zhang Chung Tai, Xiu Ka Chun, Ho Kai Ming, and Yip Kin Yun. Before we start, Secretary, some members have expressed their concern about the subject of liberal studies. You have received our letter, right? Can you say something about the scope of the review and when will it be completed? I will give you 5 minutes to respond. Yes, there are some media reports, and I've responded to the issues on various occasions. I won't waste any of your time. I know that Ms. Priscilla Leung would like to know the work on the review and what's the plan in the future. Well, I'm not directly involved in the review. As I understand it, they are now talking to different stakeholders. After this, they will proceed with a formal consultation.
Regarding the parents and the universities, I will certainly relay your views to them, and I hope that when they conduct consultation, they will also cover those stakeholders. I understand that other stakeholders involve future employers as well, so we'll certainly also collect inputs from them. I'll certainly relay that to the working group. When will you be able to come back to this council so that we can discuss that? I don't know yet at this moment. I think tentatively they're talking about conducting the consultation at the end of the year. So that roughly is our timetable. So after they have the consultation paper ready for consultation, we can certainly submit them to this council and consult your views. With that, I think we may now move on to the first item on our agenda. The first member to speak should be Ms. Claudia Mo. So you already put up your hand the last time. Why don't we, allow Mr. Dennis Kwok to speak first? Madam Chair, I think the biggest issue here, Mr. Secretary, is that when you implement the one school, one social work scheme, many of the people who are now working as social workers in schools will lose their jobs because they did not have a background in social work. My colleague, Mr. Xiu Ka Chun, I think both of us agree that the best approach is to have one social worker and one school guidance teacher. According to your present proposal, many social workers will lose their jobs. So have you consulted the social welfare sector before you came up with this recommendation? I think we've actually consulted the education sector. I've also consulted the social work profession. Under the present scheme, we're now committing more resources to the schools. Previously, for schools with 17 classes or less than that, we would give them, the salary equivalent to half of a social worker. For schools with less than 17 classes, we are paying them the full amount of the salary for one social worker. Other than giving them the salary to hire one social worker, we will give them additional resources if there are more than 12 classes. The school will have resources to hire not just the social workers but also other guidance personnel. But if you require that we can secure or guarantee the jobs of every social worker, we cannot do that. When with an injection of $130 million and each school will get on average an additional $200,000, I don't see that there will be many people who will lose their jobs. Do you have an overall figure that is after you have implemented this scheme? How many people who are now working as social workers in schools who will be affected? Chairman, I think our approach is very flexible. We now have a new system. I think everything under the old system will remain unchanged. Everybody can still do whatever they have been doing, and we will allow the schools, a transitional period of 3 years before they can opt for the new system. If the school wishes to retain the guidance personnel, they can still opt for the old system. So I can't tell you how many people will be affected. Under this system, we are already allowing a lot of flexibility for the schools. The school can opt for the new system and recruit, a graduate social worker, or they can, follow the old system. We'll give them 3 years, and meanwhile, we were discussing what would the best way to provide service in the primary schools, including the 1+1 model proposed by the profession. What we want to do now is that for some schools, they only have half a social worker. We need to give them more resources. And this is exactly what we're doing. And this is also our objective. For members who've just put up their hands, I was going to give priority to those members who put up their hands the last time, but many of them are not here. So other than members who've just put up their hands now, who would like to talk about the one social worker for each school scheme, I'd like to know how many other members who would still also want to speak, because I need to draw a line here, as we've already discussed this topic the last time already. We have Claudia Mo, Dr. Cheng Chung Tai, Siu Ka Chun, who So Kai Ming as well, MC Kin Yun. So I will now, let me check the priority. Cheng Chung Tai, Dr. Cheng Chung Tai, followed by Claudia Mo. All right? Thank you. Regarding one social worker for each school, we understand the government is trying to, further, enhance the policy regarding counseling in schools. To implement this proposal, I think the reaction from the school, especially the student counselor, is very strong. I think the secretary would know that 50 to 60% of those working in primary schools are non-social workers. Many of them are very experienced student counselors. Although you say you are allowing for a very lenient transitional period, but for the primary schools, I think the whole profession and schools are at a loss. Even yesterday, where we had our sitting, I had received complaints from teachers and school principals asking, pointing out that we need to think clearly, think out the whole guidance policy and focus on, guidance, prevention, and so before we will clearly define the roles of the school guidance teachers, parents, and teachers, rather than just react quickly to the incident in Twin Moon and say and now try to inject more cash in the scheme. Apparently, you give the impression that you're trying to shut up the school authorities and the parents. So if we want to do a good job, I think at this moment you should come up with a comprehensive policy on guidance first, instead of just coming up suddenly with this proposal to inject cash on your proposed arrangement. So in future, it shouldn't be that a school should only have one social worker and one counselor. And more importantly, I think there should be a student guidance teacher for every form or level. Only then can we really take care of the development of students. I hope the Secretary will think along those lines. Madam Chair, I more or less agree with Dr. Chang. That is regarding we need to consider the long-term development. The question now is whether or not we should immediately enhance some of the services. We've said all along that for the long term, after we've implemented the present proposal, we need to consider how we should provide counseling services in primary schools. But does that mean that we have to do this first, when we know that we shouldn't enhance the service immediately now? What we're doing is exactly that before we think about how we can make improvements in the long term. According to our statistics, 90% of the schools have their own social workers. 70% of them have degrees in social work. So we're just, proposing that the school counseling personnel should have the necessary standard. Furthermore, of course, it's a good thing that we have a social worker for each school. But I'm worried that you might be, that despite your good intentions, what you propose may not work. You're proposing to inject more cash for the school so that each school can have a formally registered social worker on site. But what about the student guidance teachers? You say that they don't have the professional background, but the teachers are those who know, best about the school and the students. The social workers have their professional expertise, they have their ways of providing counseling service, but right now we don't know what's going to happen to the student guidance teachers. You say that there are also student guidance personnel, although there are not that many of them, but at least I believe there are several thousand, or at least more than 1,000 of them. The student guidance personnel, I think there should be more than 100. How many student guidance teachers? I'm talking about the student guidance personnel. How many of them are there? I think student guidance teacher 119, student guidance personnel 500. Student guidance teachers 119, student guidance personnel, the SGOs 500. So if the number is so small, I think you should provide for one social worker and one, SGT, or even 1 + 1 + 1. That is, you also add a school, student guidance officers. You're now proposing a grace period, a 3-year grace period. Now, can you at least undertake to do this? That is, after 3 years, you will take a look again at the 1 + 1 or 1 + 2 model. Would you review that? Madam Chair, we're not saying that we will wait for 3 years before we would have a review. Now, after we implement these initiatives, we will have to consider what the service in primary school should be in the long term. We've promised the guidance teachers that we'll look into that. We've talked to the student guidance teachers. In terms of counseling service, there are different angles that we need to explore. So what the student guidance teachers are doing, we appreciate that. For the student counseling personnel, we understand the work that they are doing at schools. And the social workers also have the role. So we need to consider all those three areas in the long term. In the long term, I think you should retain the school guidance teachers and the school guidance personnel. For the SGT, we've already said that under the present system, there are 119 schools which are engaged as SGTs, and they can continue to employ them. For the others, we have reminded the schools to try their best to engage the people they are already employing. Next, Mrs. Hugh Cutchin. Thank you. Secretary, I have actually been liaising with the different organizations and discuss with them the one school, one social worker per school scheme, including the Asian Professional Counseling and Psychology Association. I don't know whether, so I think there's a lot of omission that we need to look at. Previously, there was a saying that the operation, the surgery is successful, the patients die. But now, the operation is successful, but the surgeon has died. I mean, that would be the analogy to describe the situation now. Whether it's the HGTs or the student counseling personnel, some of whom are not social workers, and some are counselors who don't have a social work background, they will be affected. So I have two questions. First of all, for the counseling personnel, they may only have a degree in psychology or counseling, and they have this humble request. All they want is the Education Bureau should take this opportunity to prove to them that student counseling personnel is a very abstract term.
Can you just call them student counselors, give them a proper title, and issue a memo to the schools to remind them they can use this additional grant to employ as student counselors or student guidance personnel. Maybe you can give them just a reminder so that the repercussions will not be too much for them. We have 100 or so people who do not hold a social work degree, but they have other degrees such as psychology or value education degrees. Can you grandfather them and treat them as if they are school social workers? Because the chance of getting a top-up social work degree is getting slimmer and slimmer in Hong Kong. Can you lower the threshold? If they have enrolled on such a program, you would regard them as school social workers without having to complete the social work degree program first. Well, we're talking about guidance personnel or counselor. We'll look at the role they play and the work they do. We can look at this in the longer term. And nowadays, they can the schools can use the grant, SGS grant, to hire them. In the future, it's the same. And for the question of social work degree programs and places, it's something for the social welfare sector to consider. So should someone holding a non-social degree, social work degree, be regarded as someone who hold a social work degree? So I cannot promise Mr. Siu that this can be done. I will talk to the social work sector to see whether we can regard such personnel as equivalent to social workers. Maybe you can look into this. I understand that the student guidance teacher have access to the similar training program, and their performance is said to be satisfactory. It's easier to help a student guidance teacher, but for social workers, if someone holds a degree other than a social work degree, so in terms of work, in terms of qualification, how should that person be regarded? We have to talk to the social work sector before we can make a decision. How many SGP are non-degree holders? Because we are talking about different situations based on different criteria. Well, we have given the schools the power to hire the people they need. So if need be, we can ask each and every school and see how many information can be obtained from them. But that requires some time to complete. Last three members, Ms. Ho Kai-ming, Yip Kyun-yun, and then Jiang Guoguan. Ho Kai-ming, Secretary. Well, this proposal has provoked a series of repercussions. It was out of good intention. The Education Bureau wants to introduce a special measures to address a special issue, but now with the repercussions, the deep-rooted problems, the deep down would be activated and surfaced to the system. So SGP, SGC, SGT are going to be affected. There's already a circular talking about how the new grant can be used. Some schools don't understand this or may have some misunderstanding on how the grant can be utilized. We have received some information from SGTs, or maybe their schools the schools have misunderstood something. So some SGTs are said to be under pressure to revert back to ordinary teaching duties. Yes, you have provided the necessary funding. Perhaps you can issue another circular, or you can organize some briefing sessions on what the SGT should do. Should they become ordinary teachers once again? And so that they will not be making a wrong decision because their employers, the schools, do not understand your instruction. There are only 10 odd teachers who would be recognized by the Education Bureau every year as SGT. Can you tell us the qualification required for teachers to become SGTs? Do we have sufficient manpower to help to deal with the curriculum adjustment and so on and so forth in the schools? So perhaps you should make sure that you should allow people with the experience and who may not be qualified to know what they should do and whether they will be allowed to continue to serve as student guidance personnel. The Bureau should do more to explain the arrangement where you use up all your time. We're trying to talk to the 119 schools employing the SGTs. We explained the arrangement in greater detail. But I believe the document we have issued is clear, but we can, of course, elaborate and explain further. When we come to a decision on how student guidance service is to be provided in the primary schools, then we will consider other issues such as training. Mr. Yip Kyun Yun. Madam Chair, this time it's something done in a rush, in a great deal of rush. So maybe the Bureau hasn't thought through thoroughly. It may be triggered by the tragedy involving a child called Nam Lam. If there's already a review, well, maybe more mature ideas will be mooted, but this time it's done in a rush. There are two downside and adverse effects. First, whether the policy intent can be achieved. So the social expectation is that additional resources should be provided so that there will be one social worker for each school. And what you have proposed is very different from, is far from far from achieving this objective. As Mr. Siu Ka-chun has said, it's just like having a successful operation and the patient is now dead. These personnel are well recognized this year for their good job in counseling, and next year they are no longer wanted. Not that they are not doing the job well anymore, but because their jobs have been taken up by someone else. The government has come up with this transitional arrangement which will last for 3 years. Is this sufficient? As Mr. Siu Ka-chun has said, the government should consider extending this transitional period. And secondly, if the teacher concerned is already studying on a social work program, can you allow them to be admitted as social worker before graduation? Or maybe some other qualifications can be considered as equivalent qualifications, because their contributions has been well recognized, and in the future their experience is something that we should value. In the past, there are teachers who did not have the requisite qualifications, but because of the long service experience, they were allowed to stay on as teachers. For today's meeting, I want to move a motion. That is to say, I want to carry on with and follow up with the motion we passed on the 13th of April. Then we will ask the government to act on it. All right. I think your views have been accepted and have been heard. So we need a quorum because we need to handle Mr. Yip's motion after the discussion is concluded. Mr. Cheong Kwok Kwan, the community has been asking for the policy of one social worker for each school to be implemented, and now the government is willing to implement this policy. And I think people understand, but I think people watching this meeting on TV might not understand what we're talking about, because we talk about one social worker, and then there were references to the student guidance teacher and student guidance officer. And some members suggest whether the student guidance personnel or officer should be recognized as a school social worker if they are already taking a course in social work. They may be confused. With this new policy implemented, there will be a transitional period during which some schools may have student guidance teachers or student guidance officers and or school social workers, or a mixture of some of them. It said that the schools can continue to adopt the present arrangement in employing the school guidance personnel, and they will not be affected by the 3 years of a transitional period. In the future, what's the respective roles and functions of school social workers and student guidance teachers or officers? So are you going to have different arrangements for schools employing the social workers and or student guidance teachers? What would they do? What would be the difference from the students' perspective? What would they be working for? Madam Chair, for student guidance teachers, they are mainly doing preventive work, or they will help students with to cope with learning difficulties. Because of the background of SGT, they are teachers. They will be able to provide the guidance and counseling. For social workers, they will be dealing with counseling cases. So maybe it's more appropriate to ask social workers to do comprehensive counseling. But for schools, they may have different needs in different areas to varying degrees.
So there is a difference between the roles and responsibilities of the SGT and the social worker. So, Chairman, we really will not rule out the 1+1 or other model or other options. But if we were to do that, we have to consider carefully the operation of the school and the need for counseling service and where the priority should be placed, and also how we should, make optimal use of resources. Of course, it would be best if we could provide for everything, but we have to bear in mind and consider which is the best way to optimize the use of our resources. Next, Mr. Luk Chung Hong. One school social worker for each school has been, something which the social work profession has been fighting for 30 years. So it's a really good, initiative. But the whole purpose of the scheme is to ensure that students will get the best counseling service, so that there will be social workers helping them, during the course of development. We understand that some social workers who work as SGPs in schools may not have a qualification in social work, but they may have a degree, but they could have a degree in education or counseling or psychology. Under the current system, I would say that they play, two roles. That is, other than people with social work background, you may even have people with a background in education. Some of them even have master's degrees, but the latter is being, ruled out. Of course, you say there's a 3-year grace period. The schools can transition to the new system gradually. But what happened after 3 years? Can you allow teachers who have other relevant, academic background in education, counseling, and so on, so that they could be given an exemption? Or for those experienced, guidance teachers who may not have a background in social work, can still have a smooth transition? Because for these social workers, I think there are at least more than 100 of them. and all of them have been working hard to pursue continuous education. Say, if I have a social degree, I may not want to pursue a degree in social work. I may want to study something else. I'm sure this is the same for other social workers. The system you now have is too rigid, and you've not really taken care of the needs of these teachers or social workers. And some of the social workers who've done a good job may be forced to leave. So I'd like to know whether you can allow for exemption for people who have other qualifications than social work to continue to stay in the school and serve the students. Well, I've said many times just now that under the present proposal, schools can choose, like Mr. Luke said, now for counselors who've performed well, the schools can continue to engage them under the current system. Even under the new system, we have an additional grant for the larger schools. They will get an additional grant together with other grants such as grants for taking care of SEN students. They can integrate those resources to engage suitable personnel. We will also consider in primary schools how we should integrate different people who are providing different services. Priscilla, I understand that the one social worker for each school, we're talking about SGTs, the role of SGTs. So my question is that when you consider the division of labor in these schools, have you ever also considered that school teachers may also need to provide counseling? The counselor may actually need to provide counseling service for the teachers. Many of the teachers are very young. For primary and secondary schools and even in universities, there's a lot of this culture of students lodging complaints. Other than primary school students who have committed suicide, we've seen many primary school teachers who've also committed suicide, which is a sad thing. So under the one social worker for each school model, or the 1+1 model, where you will also allow SGTs, then other than students and parents, I think you should also leverage on the teachers to provide counseling if there is a need. Well, in the design and as far as the provision of resources are concerned, we are always focusing on the needs of the students. We would need to ensure that the resources are spent on the students. But in some circumstances where the teachers encountered challenges or difficulties, I'm sure the social worker in school will be happy to provide the teacher with the counseling service or advice. I think, colleagues helping each other is only the normal thing to do. But if we think that the teacher requires certain service, the Education Bureau will look into that from a territory-wide basis. But when you talk about one social worker for each school and the provision of counseling service, we must be student-focused. Yes, I understand, but very often, as I said, the situation I alluded to earlier has happened. I'm just saying that, first of all, different people have different roles to play. So is it that right now you would allow the resident social worker to also provide counseling to teachers who are encountering difficulties or problems? Or is it that the teacher has to go outside the school to seek help? Secretary, it would depend on what sort of assistance the teacher requires. Of course, I wouldn't say that the counselor, it is the duty of the social worker to provide counseling service for teachers. But as I said, if one colleague could help each other, I'm sure the social worker at school would be willing to do that. Mr. Chi Fung, you've also, because he's also put up his hand the last time. Thank you. Having heard the Secretary, I think the situation in schools at the moment is not very clear. So could the Secretary, explain clearly the respective roles of social workers and the SGTs and the SGPs? So as the Bureau spearheading the policy and allocating the resources, you have to explain clearly to the school and the parents, and you shouldn't say that the schools can deploy the resources in any way they like. So if something should go wrong, for example, say if a student commits suicide, I think the official position is that for these three, different roles, they all have the respective expertise. But under the one social worker for each school scheme, have you ignored the roles played by these three different categories of people? Or is it your position that all these roles should be taken up by social workers? I think we can have a debate, because this has been, proposed by the social work profession. So I don't think you should leave it just to the schools. You should also have your position. Well, let me explain the background in detail, because I have not had the opportunity to explain this in the details to Mr. Hui. In primary schools, we're talking about the provision of, an integrated counseling service. All teachers in school have to participate in the provision of counseling service. In primary schools, the students typically will encounter learning difficulties. For example, they may not be able to adapt to the classroom environment. There might be problems at home which result in their social interaction at school and thus affecting the studies. So that's why we have always all along adopted, an all-round, counseling service. We used to have student counseling teachers, and we relied on a grant system. We look at the circumstances of the schools will engage different people in the light of their own circumstances. They may hire SGTs or social workers or SGPs. That is under the concept of an integrated, counseling service. They do it. In the last few years, we have had many complex social problems. In the past, problems encountered by secondary school students are now being encountered by primary school students as well. Also, we have had some unfortunate incidents, and as a result, the government took immediate action to launch the one social worker for each school scheme. It would appear that in primary school we need to provide formal, proper social work service in primary schools as well. We need to do that immediately, but in the long term we have to consider, whether we should fine-tune the system. And that's why we said in the long term we need to conduct a review. Do you agree that these three different categories of people will continue to exist? Well, if you look at the current structure, they still exist in the schools. Secondary, I think this is rather complex. I think in future you may need to review this and see whether you can come up with a standardized approach, because not everyone is capable of counseling primary school pupils. It's not other than those who have just have a background in psychology or so the person must also have the relevant experience. I think Mrs. Yip has also put in a written question. I hope the Secretary can also respond to Mrs. Yip's question. We will now deal with the motion moved by Mr. Yip Kin Yin. Do we have a quorum now, Secretary? Mr. Yip's motion is tabled for members already. Mr. Yip, I'll read this out, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, the first paragraph is the preamble. I'll read out the second paragraph. In the circular dated 13th of April issued by the Bureau, they were not compatible with the four resolutions endorsed by this panel, and it is also different from the public expectation that we should provide more social work resources in schools. We reiterate that we should, that you should endorse the demand as per the four resolutions, and the government should conduct a review as soon as possible so that we can enhance to ensure that there will be better collaboration between the SGT and the social workers. Those in favor, 8. Those against? Abstention? So I declare that Mr. Yip's motion is carried. We will now move on to the next item. Now that we have passed the motion, how would the Secretary follow up? Could we ask him how he's going to follow up on this? It doesn't take a minute. We've already there with a motion, and I would need to follow the agenda. You're raising a new issue. I'm just asking how he will follow up after we've endorsed the motion. Typically, the Bureau will give us a written reply. Next item is the proposed further injection to the Gifted Education Fund. Why don't you, ask the Secretariat? Why won't you allow them to answer the question? So I think we need to, exercise time management. We're already into the next item. I've already gone to the next item. All right, we've already finished with questions by members. We've already dealt with a motion, and you're so late to the meeting. And are you going to ask a question? Well, you're so senior, and yet you're not following the rules. All right, please be quiet. Let's move on. We will now, first of all, like to welcome the officials attending our meeting. And we will ask Madam Young to walk us through the paper. In the budget for 2018-2019, the FS proposed that we should inject $800 million into the Gifted Education Fund. I'd like to explain the rationale for the injection and the purpose of the fund. In nurturing local gifted students and enabling us to develop our talent pool is very important. I think gifted education has developed very rapidly in other countries. In order to follow this trend, the government needs to provide more resources to enhance training for gifted children. The FC of LegCo in 2016, approved the funding of allocation of $800 million to set up the fund, and that the investment return generated from the fund could be used to support the development of gifted education.
We've also set up a consultative committee on gifted education to provide advice to the Director of Secretary for Education on use and management of the GE Fund. And we have actually carried out a review of the work of the gifted education. In terms of provision of courses, actually they are enhancement courses basically to expand the experience, the horizons of experience of students, and also to encourage them to pursue excellence. We'll look at the situation in this area in other countries. We believe that apart from these enhancement programs, we need to expand the the extent of enrichment programs, and so more advanced programs should be offered so that they can gain the higher quality learning experience. The institutions would be involved in preparing the students. And we are going to ask the Hong Kong Academy for Gifted Education to cooperate with tertiary institutions to offer more programs, and we also encourage them to participate in international competitions. Since March 2017, the Gifted Education Fund has been placed with the Exchange Fund, but the return is only sufficient to support the expanded scale and scope of the gifted education to a limited extent. While we would like the Hong Kong Academy for Gifted Education to seek sponsorship and donations to support his work, but there is only a limited amount of donations and sponsorship received. And even though fees may be levied, we will not be expecting this to become a major source of revenue. And in order to provide more resources for enrichment programs, and also to promote aptitude training programs, we are going to provide another injection of $800 million into the GE fund. So altogether there will be $1.6 billion. We believe that from now on to 2019 to 2022, we may be able to get a investment return of some 60 million to 78 million. We're happy to take questions from members. Who would like to ask questions? Hands up, please. 3 minutes, as in line with our usual practice. May I also remind members that financial provisions, that is money, is involved. So if you have pecuniary interest on this injection, please declare the nature of your interest first before you speak. First one, 5 members have raised their hands: Cheng Chung Tai, Helena Wong, Jiang Kok-kwan. All right, any more? To manage time, I will draw a line here. Dr. Jiang Chung Tai. Thank you, Madam Chair. I've read the paper for this item. We have this Hong Kong Academy for Gifted Education, which is a not-for-profit organization. We all want to promote gifted education. But can the government explain why it was given 800 million in 2016? Just after 2 years, you need to inject another 800 million. Why do you say that 800 million is insufficient and you need to inject another 800 million? I read the paper. I don't know why after 2 years of the establishment of the academy, you need another 800 million. Well, in 2016, the $800 million is this endowment, and only the return from the fund would be used on promotion of gifted education. And we have got a return of 14 million, which is not sufficient to meet the expenditure of the academy. The academy cannot stop operation all of a sudden. Therefore, having regard to the financial situation of the Bureau, we provided some resources so as to sustain the academy for the full year operation. With a low investment return, it's just insufficient to maintain the operation of the academy, and not to mention expansion of service, and there will not be financial return to support more institutions to promote and to develop the gifted education. And the $1.6 billion there will be the capital sum. We will only be using the investment return to support gifted education and the work of relevant institutions. We understand that it's just a fund. Why is it that we don't see the investment return for the past 2 years in the paper? You say this is insufficient, it's just $14 million, but as a not-for-profit organization, and I think 14 million is quite substantial for a non-profit organization, not-for-profit organization, and the work has been criticized. And that is to say, you don't ask for any fee to be paid in the programs, and therefore the attendance rates are not good, and some programs are not. Some programs fail to attract any applicants. So why don't you look at the mode of operation first before you inject more funds? Can you address the question of low attendance rate? Time is already up. Can you provide an answer in writing? Yes, but we have Professor Untitled from the Academy who may be able to explain why. If I may, I can also say something. The Academy was not set up in 2016. It has been around for more than 10 years. And there were donations, lump sum donations, and the money. The government also provided a seed money. But the donation discontinued since 2016. It became a subsidized organization through the G Fund. We provide the funding. The programs have been offered for many years, and not just starting from 2016. As for why the attendance is poor, and what about cutting unpopular programs and coming up with more popular ones? I can provide a written reply, or I can ask Professor Ng to respond. It depends. We would be directed by the chairperson in this regard. Well, I think members would like to know more about the need for further injection for the GE fund. Can we have some response from Professor Ng? Let me talk about the attendance rate. There's some misunderstanding. The programs, I'm not just talking about attendance rate, but successful completion of programs. The rate of completion is 80%. We are not an ordinary school. There is no requirement on attendance by any student. And 80% of completion as a completion rate is high. The newspapers talk about attendance rate. They are not talking about attendance of the instruction courses. Most of these students we enrolled are recommended by their schools. Sometimes the schools do not recommend the right students, and some 50% of the recommended students that do not choose our programs is different from the popularity or how many students do enroll on our programs. Some members would like to visit the Academy to know more about the way you operate your programs. And even if this proposal is endorsed in this panel, they still have to submit an item to the FC for funding approval. Mr. Yip Kun Yuen, with regard to gifted education and also the work of the Academy, I don't want to cast any query or doubts or queries, but I have something to say about the mode of fund injection. According to the Permanent Secretary, the return from investment is $14 million. But in paragraph 12, it said that the return in 2017 was $22.4 million. So which one is correct? I'm sorry, I have to apologize. The return, the income, is as stated in the paper, but we cannot use all the income. In 2017-2018 school year, the fund allocated $14 million. So the income of the fund was $22.4 million, and you gave the Academy $14 million. What's happened to the $10 million? We cannot give all the income. There is a balance of $870 million. The fund will need to carry out other operations. And even if we gave them the full income generated The expenditure of the academy was more than 30 million last year, so it's still not sufficient. So, Permanent Secretary, your income was 22.4 million. You gave them 14 million, so there's a balance of $8 million. Are you talking about operating expenses of the fund? If that's the case, it's very high. No, the balance of the fund is $870 million. So you are talking about a few hundreds of thousands to up to $1 million in terms of operating expenses of the fund. And with regard to the using a fund to provide the injection, there's a cost to it. I know this has been placed with the exchange fund, and also in the Permanent Secretary is a trustee, and you need to submit accounts. There are administrative costs involved. If it's just 100 million, it's still a substantial sum. Why didn't we regard this as a recurrent expenditure in providing the funds? Why did you set up a fund? Are there advantages that we do not understand yet? Permanent Secretary setting up a fund for a specific, for a particular purpose, and for the purpose of providing financial provision is a usual practice for the government. Setting up a fund and using the income rate of the return to fund the operations will mean that it would be guaranteed an annual provision without having to compete with other purposes. This is a dedicated fund, and there will be dedicated income for the program, for the future planning, so that they can do a more thorough job in forward planning. Or if it's regarded as recurrent expenditure, then there's no need to compete with other operations. That will also be stable. So whether you should set up a fund to do this, or you should put this under the recurrent expenditure, is something that we need to look into.
Hi. Let's continue to monitor the fund, because the fund has only been set up for a short time after all. The Permanent Secretary is that you do have some quantifiable, objectives, and there will be tracking studies. Where will you be able to give us those details? I believe we have to wait for the fund to operate for a few more years, and also for the academy, with the support of the fund, to operate for a few more years before we can set the target. I think right now we want to, first implement the scheme. There are already some, constraint in terms of the budget of finance. So therefore we don't have any details regarding student achievement and so on. But if you want to look at the figures, for 2016-2017, the total number of students who enrolled for the courses in the academy was about 11,500. Next, Dr. Helena Wong. Thank you. I think the DP in principle supports the government providing resources on gifted education. But the government is allocating another 800 million after the initial 800 million. And the money is mainly spent on the academy. You're talking about the three tiers. Tier 1 and Tier 2 are already paid for under the recurrent expenditure of the Education Bureau. The fund is set up to fund the academy. The academy is part of government, but they're using government resources. So the issue now here is the question of accountability, and also so we don't really know how much the academy needs for every year for its operation. How many people, how many staff does it have? How much is spent on program fees and so on? We don't have any such details. When we check the website, they talk about students taking part in the mathematics Olympiad and so on, but we don't have details regarding the financial details. So who is going to monitor the books or budget? Is it for the fund or the Education Bureau who will do that? How can LegCo and the public know that after receiving 60 million, and now you're saying that it's going to go up to close to 80 million? And it's not a small amount, 80 million. So could the government tell us, how do you monitor the financial position of the Academy to ensure that there is greater transparency? Well, I think there is a board governing the Academy. The Education Bureau is also represented on that board. Myself and the Deputy Secretary are both members of the board. We also have other members as well, including Ms. Emily Lau, and school principals who sit on the board of the Academy. Regarding the financial position of the Academy, the board will certainly monitor that. What about people outside of the board? If anyone, well, I think the audited account of the Academy, I think the Academy is not a secret institution. We can certainly talk to the Academy and see whether or not they can upload their audited financial statement onto the website. I think when you go to the FC, if you don't give us details and breakdowns of how much they spend on employing staff and how much they spend on the curriculum, then we wouldn't know whether the Academy is really making a profit or not, and also whether they really need close to $60 or $70 million a year. Chairman. Yeah, please be brief. I was talking about the $60, $70 million just now. Other than you supporting the operation of the Academy, there are also other organizations, providing gifted education, such as a few of the universities in Hong Kong, and they do charge for services. One advisory committee has also recommended that we should support those initiatives as well, because the Academy alone, we cannot compel gifted children to attend the courses of this Academy. Some may choose not to come, so they may go to other institutions to receive gifted education, and we'll also support those as well. And secondly, if members are interested, I can, after the meeting today, provide details regarding the financial position of the Academy for members. In 2017-2018, since the accounts is not yet ready, but for staff expense, it's amount to 29 million. Expenses on curriculum is about 67 million. Regarding the staff cost, the Academy is now facing a very high turnover rate, and because it has to compete with other institutions for talents. So in 2017 and 2018, the attrition rate is 65%. So how the Academy can retain staff is something that we need to also consider. How many staff does the Academy have? Perhaps I can ask Professor Ng to answer the question. I think we now have a staff of 55. Right. I think the Permanent Secretary has promised that after the meeting she will provide the detailed financial data in relation to the Academy for members. Next, Mr. Shiu Ka-chun. Thank you. Regarding gifted education, I don't have any interest declare. On the other hand, I have some worries. My worry is that in the past we have seen situations in which gifted education lack the social skills or communication skills, and as a result they will engage in unnecessary disputes with other people. And in some shape or one such gifted child actually damage the display board of some people. So I understand that gifted children may not really have are gifted in every aspect of life. Next, regarding the injection, the Permanent Secretary is giving us the impression that this is all well planned beforehand, and that the injection of it's only reasonable. It's the only reasonable thing to do. But when are you going to have the third injection? Are you saying that next year you will be coming to us and ask for another cash injection because the return on investment is so much and then you need to spend that much? So injection seems to be the normal thing to do. And this is what I'm rather, curious. Do you need the cash injection just because you have cost overrun? So I think, I think so if we need cash injection because there has been cost overrun, at least you should explain. And I don't think you should take this as granted. So you're saying that there's only $14 million and how can they, maintain the operation? So I really don't understand.
So if
you are asking for cash injection, I don't think you should take it for granted. And also tell us whether next year you will need a further injection. Permanent Secretary, I think the member asked the right question. Let me first take the first question. Mr. Siu is concerned about the communication and social skills of the gifted children. I think in our gifted education, we've also taken care of that. When I spoke earlier, I said that in future, we have three future directions. First of all, we will have, advanced courses, and we will step up the, emotive education or for gifted children. We'll teach them skills regarding interpersonal relationships and social skills. But for some gifted children, they do have such needs. So this is one of the directions that we would take going forward. As to why after we made the previous injection, we need further injection. Have we made a mistake in terms of our estimates? For the investment return for 2017-2018 was lower than expected. The original estimate was that it would be 5%. In the end, we only got a return of 2.8%. And that's why we're proposing further injection this time, because we will need to look at the forecast for 2019 to 2022. So we've actually set a floor and a ceiling, and I said that it's roughly between 60 to 77 odd million. I understand that the academic expenditure now is about $30 million odd dollars. Then if we are to expand the service that they provide and provide more advanced courses, I don't think the expenses should double, but on the other hand, it would require some additional increases. So if their income were roughly 60 to 78 million, that should be enough to pay for the operation cost of the academy for the next few years. But should there be any unexpected, setbacks in our investment return, we can't guarantee that. Permanent Secretary, sorry for the interruption. Is it that you can never touch the principal? When the fund was first set up, our position was that under exceptional circumstances we could use the principal, but it would only be exceptional circumstances, because if we touch the principal every year, it will be exhausted very soon. We need to exercise financial prudence. I think members are concerned that if the return was smaller than expected, and if there should be a loss incurred next year, which is possible, even the monetary authority have incurred losses before. So I think the members' concern is really justified. Next, Cheung Kwok Kwan. Thank you. The DAP supports in principle the injection into the Gifted Education Fund, but I also like to ask a few questions. In paragraph 9 of the paper, we understand that the authorities have already making reference of the development of gifted education in other jurisdictions, and therefore believe that we need to provide for more advanced courses for gifted children. So you say you've made reference of experience in other jurisdictions. Which are these countries? And which of the experience are those that we can learn from? So what exactly are such experiences? Could you share that with us? Permanent Secretary. I'll start and I'll ask Professor Ng to supplement. The professor is more knowledgeable in this area. We've looked at the experience in several countries such as Singapore, and also Israel, which has done a very good job in gifted education, as well as other jurisdictions. While we did not visit those countries, we've actually conducted, literature review. And I'll ask Professor Ng to elaborate. Other than Singapore and Israel, we've also made reference of experience in Korea, South Korea, and Taiwan. We've also learned from the experience of the United States. Our design is more modeled on the Australian model, Israeli model. What they do is very similar to what we have in Hong Kong. In countries like Singapore and South Korea, they have special schools. Israel does not have that, like Hong Kong. All the students will attend public schools. There are 2 special schools run by religious organizations, but they're not, school for gifted children. But they have courses for gifted children, and these children will attend lessons on weekends. So in Israel, as you can see, they've done very well in terms of technology and innovation, and the Israeli young people have been also very successful with startups. So we therefore have learned from their successful experience. So Israel actually is the country that provides us with the most useful reference. Do I still have time? Yes. Lastly, Dennis Kwok. Could somebody please switch on my microphone? For children who have the twice exceptional quality, they may have SCNs, they could be autistic. At the same time, they could be very exceptional in certain domains. For the double giftedness and twice exceptional children, will they also be covered by this, gifted education fund? Madam Secretary?
Well, if the child is gifted but at the same time has special educational needs or disability, if the giftedness is very special, then we can help them under gifted education. So you recognize this concept. I see the professor nodding, but maybe the professor can say something about this. I will ask the professor to explain. In the academy, when we invite schools to recommend students, we will never disqualify people with different needs. And we have also provide service to SEN students. Of course, you won't disqualify them, but do you recognize that many SEN students are also gifted? So is this recognized by you? Do you have this knowledge? And would you take the initiative to understand whether some SEN students are also gifted in some other way? Professor, we have not been able to do this proactively to check or to assess students. We don't have policy on assessment covering all students. When the students approach our academy to see if whether the student is gifted and at the same time has other issues. Do you help the SEN students in respect of the special needs and at the same time help them to develop their giftedness? Do you have a package program like this? We don't have such a special arrangement. That's the problem. In other words, you don't recognize the thrice exceptional concept. You may know that they are there. Can you use some part of the $800 million on this group? We know that there are many gifted students have other SEN, as special educational needs. So you need to provide support to this group of students. For gifted students or SEN students, we use the integrated education approach. As Professor Ng has said, we are modeled like the Israeli system, and that they will be learning in schools in the community. We believe that's more helpful. As for the academy, they offer courses during weekends and holidays to develop the gifted students in special areas such as science, mathematics, or language. We don't have a program targeting every student in Hong Kong to see whether they are in any way gifted, or whether SEN students are gifted in some other way, and then take them out for educational development. We believe that they should be learning in public schools, but of course, can we do a better job in the interaction and collaboration between schools and academy? We can certainly explore what we can do. Or at present, you mainly rely on recommendations from schools. Let's say a special school recommends a student who is gifted in mathematics. Would you accept this student? Yes? Okay. That's not the problem. If I may, Madam Chair, many scientific research and data have informed us that many SEN students are gifted, but in the arrangement you do not recognize this. You rely on the schools to choose students. They won't know this because they will be dealing with the SEN students to help them. They don't know that these students may be gifted in some other ways. So if you utilize the $800 million in some way to help the schools in identifying whether SEN students are gifted, please, I think this should be considered. You see that there are many talented people in other countries who are talented and at the same time handicapped in some other way. We can certainly help schools to identify gifted students. And I would say that putting these students in ordinary schools may not help them. Sometimes it's quite the opposite. Members, do we agree that this particular funding applications be submitted to the Finance Committee? Or any objection to the submission of this proposal to the FC? No? Then I take it that members all agree. Deputy Chairman? Okay, it's okay for the proposal to go to the FC, but we have asked many questions. We need to get more information on the injection, the financial position of the fund, and also Mr. Tennis Kwok's questions. We need the information, which is important in the FC discussion. When can you give us the information? Oh, much of the information is already with us. We can do it quickly. I think maybe a visit can be arranged. Then the FC discussion will be quite, very much more substantial if we know better the work of the academy. All right, can this be done, Permanent Secretary? I'll ask the clerk to make arrangements, preferably before the FC meeting. Last item. construction of an assembly hall at Mun Sung College at 8 Dumbarton Road, Kowloon City. Thank you for coming to our meeting. Let's invite the next team of officials.
好，咁咧就我提醒各位議員咧，就呢個
Members, again, it's an item involving the financial application. It will be submitted to the PWSC and FC. So members, if you have direct or indirect pecuniary interest, please declare the nature of interest before you speak. Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Ingrid Young, please walk us through the paper. We propose that the construction of an assembly hall at Mun Sung College at 8 Dumbarton Road, Kowloon City to improve its learning and teaching environment. Mun Sung School was a private school with 30 classrooms, and there's the primary school and sharing the hall with the college, and it became an aided school in 1978, and the assembly hall is shared by three schools. As a result, Mun Sung College find it difficult to organize large-scale teaching activities in the hall, and they are also facing shortage of stores and ancillary facilities, and some of the existing facilities, such as the covered playground, multi-purpose area, and student activity centers, are undersized and substandard. Therefore, we need to construct a new assembly hall with those facilities to improve the teaching and learning environment. The school sponsoring body would fund the non-standard facilities, and also the cost of the non-subvented portions of the hall. We went to the Kowloon City, the Housing and Infrastructure Committee on the 15th of March this year. Members of the committee supported the project. If this is supported, then in accordance with the established mechanism, we would as soon as possible submit an item to the PWSC, and then a funding application of the FC will be sought as soon as possible. The construction work is expected to take about 26 months. Let's say if at the end of this year we can start the project, it would be completed in 2021.
去葉建源先嚇。
主席
Mr. Yip Kyun-yuan, well, with regard to this project to construct an assembly hall at Mun Sung College, I support it. It became a subvented school in 1978. It did not have a assembly hall. The school campus is big. I didn't understand why they had this problem. Then I understand that although the campus is big, but they have both a secondary school, a primary school, and a kindergarten. And this college, Mun Sung College, does not have its own assembly hall, so the many activities cannot be organized. I have visited the college and I've talked to the students. I'm told that the music activities and even PE programs have encountered difficulties in organization. So we're now making up for the shortage of essential facility. So it's really urgent. And secondly, I want to talk about the paper. Apart from government funding, Mun Sung College will also provide non-standard, self-financed non-standard facilities. Is that there will be a detailed provision table setting out the non-standard facilities. But it's very brief in this paper. I hope the FC application will contain more details on such facilities. Apart from Munson College, there are other primary and secondary schools which do not have their own assembly halls. Can we be given some data on such schools? Last year I wrote to the secretary. I mentioned in particular Kowloon Tong Secondary School. It does not have an assembly hall, and when it rains, the student can only stand in the corridors. They have nowhere to take the recess or to do the PE lesson. So are there plans to address the problems faced by schools like Kowloon Tong Secondary School? Permanent Secretary, I don't have the detailed information with me on how many schools are not having their assembly halls. But in respect of Kowloon Tong Secondary School, let me say something about this. We have been paying attention to the teaching and learning environment of schools. We know that between 1994 and 2006, there's the school improvement work program, which involve large-scale renovation and improvement to the school environment. In 1999, for Kowloon Tong Secondary School, through the school improvement project, a new annex was built with more facilities such as student activity center, classrooms, and a teacher's room, and so on. And through the annual urgent maintenance and improvement projects, we have also provided some more resources. We have built a new annex for the school already. So in terms of priority, we cannot give the school that is a Kowloon Tong Secondary School a priority in getting a assembly hall. Maybe they have to go, they do an in situ redevelopment before they can get an assembly hall. But so far, no in situ redevelopment has been planned. Also, the Gifted Education Fund was given $800 million. 2 years down the road, another $800 million. But for this Kowloon Tong, the secondary school, since they have been given a new annex, they are not going to give them the assembly hall, and they have to wait in accordance with the priority. I don't know why you treat schools without such an essential facility this way, because we are talking about an assembly hall, which is essential to a school.
Madam Chair, there are lots of works which need to be carried out, and we need to work out a priority. I was saying that in terms of priority, we will not be able to give Kowloon Tong Secondary School a priority, but we are not ruling out the fact that we're not saying that we won't be helping the school to build a school hall. The resources we are putting on to schools is quite substantial already. In the budget this year, we have already increased the provision by 28%. So for the facilities and the hardwares in schools, we really attach a lot of importance to them. So where would you then put your priority? If a school doesn't even have an essential facility like a hall, so does it mean that you only give priority to schools if they don't have classrooms? Okay, your time is up. Next, Helena Wong. Madam Chair, the paper is too brief and I don't quite get the whole picture. Right now, Munson College operates a kindergarten, a primary school, and a secondary school. We're now talking about the secondary session, which requires an independent school hall. You're saying that in 1978 they've already converted into an aided school. But why is it that since 1978 and we are now already in 2018? So for so many years, the school does not have a school hall and is not operating in a standard standard campus. But on the other hand, it is an aided school. So I don't understand why for so many years they have been deprived of a school hall. Prime Secretary, do you know why? I think adding facilities to a school requires the school itself to come up with a plan. In 2012, the Munson College put forward this proposal, and the Bureau also approved that plan in 2012, and since then we've been following up on this project with them all along. I think it also depends on how the school proposes to add more facilities. But doesn't have the school have standard requirements? If the school doesn't put forward any proposal, the government will simply, leave them alone. The initiative should come from the school. Is it that the school should be taking the initiative to apply for the construction of a hall? Indeed, the initiative will need to come from the school because the circumstances in different schools vary. For example, if a school needs to add facilities, they may need to redevelop. So if you want to redevelop a school, I think the circumstances in different schools are different. So the whole process will need to be initiated by the school themselves. But over the years, our standard for schools have been improving all along. For some schools which were built decades ago, they were compatible with the standards of the time, but now with our improved standard, they are now falling behind. But in that case, since Munson College is an aided school, and they also provide free education for the students, right? So in that case, since it is an aided school, why is it that its campus, I think they will now need to build a school hall. The government is only paying for $84.1 million, but the whole project will cost $139 million. So the school would need to, raise funds to pay for the balance. Why is it that you are not paying for the whole amount for the project? Well, under the present standard, the government is paying for all the provision of all the necessary standard facilities, but they are now proposing to build an indoor gymnasium, so it's not part of the standard facility, and the school sponsoring body would need to pay for it. So for a standard school, there is no there shouldn't be a gymnasium. Yes. What about playground? Yes, playground is part of the standard facility. I think Mr. Yip would like to ask for a list of the schools which don't have their own halls. And Dr. Helena Wong might also want to know how many schools have now put in their applications. You say the school should take the initiative to apply. So how many schools already put in their applications? Could you give us such information after the meeting? Right. Next, Ms. Jiang Wing-shun. I also support the application. I also know that the Munson College is a very large campus, but the facilities are substandard. So in principle, I support this arrangement. But I have two questions. In Venice Road now is undergoing a lot of changes. There are many schools in the area. So the capital works to be carried out here, how will they affect the residents in the vicinity? And secondly, to follow up on Mr. Yip's point, for the improvement plan, you're not doing a lot. There are many other schools. Take the Sam Shui Po Kai Fong Association Primary School is lacking in many facilities. Munson College is fortunate they have the space. For many other schools, they don't simply have the space, and the facilities are substandard. So for the larger improvement projects, I think you should be able to help these smaller and older schools. Can you do that? So that they don't fall behind many of the newer schools. Permanent Secretary, first of all, for the when the school hall is being built for Munson College, whether it will cause any environmental nuisance. The site is within Munson College, and the school sponsoring body has already communicated with the neighboring schools and the community, and also will be requiring the contractor to carry out all the necessary environmental mitigating measures. The Munson Primary School is now has now a project going on. They are building a new annex there. So for the school hall complex for Munson College, the lorries and vehicles are coming in and out of the site. They will be using the same entrance and exit for the new wing of the primary school, so it's away from the rest of the campus. And also there will be pavements, covered pavements to protect the pedestrians. As for other schools which are also lacking in certain facilities, as I said, every year we are actually investing a lot of resources to help those schools to do that. In our budget this year, the budget has gone up by 28% to carry out emergency repairs and large-scale maintenance work. For some schools, they may need to, increase certain facilities, and it is through such funding that we would help them to do that. Of course, they would need to put in an application, and we need to work out the priorities. But the resources that we've committed to this area is quite substantial. Right. Madam Secretary, I would also like to ask a question. The hall. I was given the school has 30 classes. How many students can the hall accommodate? Can it accommodate 1,000 people? Thank you. For the Munson College Secondary School, they have 30 classes and about 990 students. In the design of for the design of a school hall, normally it will have 1.5 floors, and I believe that the current design will allow the school, will be sufficient for the school, and the school has told us that it would be big enough. So if you're going to build a large school hall like that, does it mean that it will take away part of the playground? Yes, like Mr. Yip said, there are three, you have the kindergarten, primary, and the secondary schools, so the campus is a very large area, and the school hall is built on some of the empty space. So with the building of the hall, there will be less open space, but it will not result in the playground having to be reduced in size. On the other hand, after we've completed the school hall complex, there will be a covered playground so that PE lessons can still be conducted during the rainy season. So do members agree that this item should be forwarded to the PWSC? Are we in agreement? No objection? Thank you. So we therefore recommend that this paper be forwarded to the PWSC for deliberation. So I think we've already finished our deliberation on all the agenda items. For AOB, do we have any other business? If not, then our meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you, Permanent Secretary and your team.